Hi everyone, this is Aaron. I am Dive In, Dig Deep, and we're trying to go live with Barnabas Piper. Let's see if we can get this going. Hi everybody, thanks for joining. And we're going to talk about his book, Hoping for Happiness. Barnabas, I see you in the chat. Let's get you in here. Barnabas Piper,
Hey, how are you?
how are you doing, man?
I'm doing very well.
First off, I want to say thanks for taking the time to do this. Um, I was actually surprised you said that you would do it. So I'm like, and I think a lot of other people were surprised too. I got a lot of messages saying, I can't believe this is happening. And so I
Oh
do want to
man,
say thanks for taking the time.
yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm honored you asked. I couldn't. There was no reason not to, and I looked at I saw who else you had had a chance to talk to, and some of them were people I know and respect, and some were friends, and I thought, man, this is great. I'd love to do this.
Oh, for sure. And I appreciate that. I appreciate you for checking it out. And I do thank everyone else for, all the previous people I've talked to. It's really fun to be able to talk to some of my favorite authors. And you're in Nashville right now, right?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and so I do thank you for taking the time. There is a time difference. I'm over here in LA, and so just thanks for being flexible too and trying to make this happen.
My pleasure, man. I'm looking forward to it.
I do have a couple questions for you, and if people join us in the chat, they can always submit questions. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and maybe you can talk about how you're actually a recovering cynic, I guess, in your introduction.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the people who know me best might kind of raise an eyebrow at the idea of recovering. They might say, you might just be a cynic. Um, So yeah, as you mentioned, I live in the Nashville area. I'm on staff at Immanuel Nashville, so it's a church over on the west side of town, and
Yeah.
just recently completed the ordination process. So I'm in process of moving on staff as a pastor once the people vote, Lord willing, in a couple of weeks. So that's a major transition for me. Prior to being on staff at Immanuel, I worked in publishing for about 14, 15 years, Christian publishing. And but yeah, just in terms of who I am, you mentioned the recovering cynic thing. That's something I mentioned in the book. And
Yeah.
yeah, just my bent towards the world is to kind of always look at things and go, yeah, it probably won't work out that well. So it's not pessimism, because pessimism says, everything's going to go wrong.
Hmm.
Cynicism says it's just not going to be as great as you think it will. So it just kind of puts a ceiling on your capacity for enjoyment, things like that. And so for me, a lot of times what that looked like was only giving, say, 80 or 90% to my work or to a sports team or to whatever, because if you only give 80 or 90%, you always have an excuse if it doesn't work out.
Right.
You can be
Right.
like, well, it's just, if I had given the other 10 or 20, maybe. So there's just sort of this cynicism kind of held me back, but it also held me back from really being able to enjoy things as God intended them to be enjoyed, whether that was, friendships, relationships, church. Church was a big one that I've had to kind of grow into really digging deep into in the way that God wants, and in a way that's rich and meaningful. But even just the more simple gifts of life, music or food or those kinds of things. So yeah, that's a little bit for context. And then the recovering aspect is just, I think, a growing awareness of that tendency, and then the desire to really enjoy and engage aspects of life the way that God designed for maximum enjoyment, but maximum enjoyment kind of within the scope of how He intends. So not just sort of a perpetual chasing of pleasure.
Yeah, and honestly, I appreciate that perspective of how you did say you're a recovering cynic. I think because if you're going to write a book about hoping for happiness, I don't want to read about it from somebody who says, I have all the joy in the world. I have this figured out. And when I saw that you said you're, a recovering cynic, I was like, that really like resonates with me. And I'm sure it does a lot of people as well. there are a lot of phrases I think that you used in your book, and I'm gonna read one of them right here. Um, you said, "Whatever we find happiness in, we are united by our desire for work that matters and relationships that fulfill." And
Mhm.
to me, I think that was a great way to kind of begin this because, yeah, work and relationships. How did that jump out at you? Like, how were you able to discern that and put that into writing?
Yeah, I think most kind of the whole direction of the book and the books that I've written previously all kind of come from a combination of two things. One is I start to get this kind of an itch that needs to be scratched, an idea itch, something I've noticed about my own experiences, my own life, my own struggles in some cases. Um, and and so, but that's not a good enough reason to write a book because what if I'm crazy? So then comes the second half, which is looking around and talking to other people and just sort of trying to observe the world well to say, is this how other people are engaging things? And so that observation just came from my own recognition that I had bounced from job to job at different points or just struggled with dissatisfaction in jobs.
Mm,
I'd been in, I wrote about this in the book, but I was married for 11 and a half years. And then a few years ago, that marriage came to an end. And so there was, high aspirations and then massive disappointment.
yeah.
I'm remarried now. And so again, high aspirations. And what I want to bring into this marriage is not the kind of expectations that can't be fulfilled, but the kind that God intends, for marriage. And
Yeah.
so all of that I looked at and thought, well, this is my experience, but I think it's universal for everyone. There's just an ever just ongoing pursuit of, I want work that matters. Either it fulfills me, it does good in the world, I can use my talents. Ideally, I can pay my bills, possibly get rich if that's the thing that motivates a lot of people.
Yeah.
And then in relationships, the same thing. Friendships, romantic relationships, familial relationships that are deep and meaningful. And when that doesn't happen, that's where like the grinding sense of frustration in life is probably at its utmost.
Mm. And honestly, all of that is compacting like today, like in here in 2020. But we can talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
I want to move forward with some of these other questions. And we were talking about like the phrases that you use in your writing. And one that really stood out to me here was hanging your happiness on hooks.
Yeah.
Now, I know you kind of, went into detail about that, about how you came up with that in your book. But for our listeners, I really thought that was great. So could you just share a little bit how you came up with that illustration
Yeah.
and how you put it into writing?
Yeah, when I was growing up, my dad's a pastor, and every year somebody from our church congregation would give us a massive bag, like huge Santa gift bag size, like toy sack of like office products from 3M, and so, and as we got older, that became cooler and cooler because, we'd come home for Christmas from moving away and we like stock up on office supplies for the year. So there's Post-it
Yeah.
notes and Scotch tape and whatever else. But the thing that always ended up at the bottom of the bag was these, those plastic sticky hooks. I think they're called command hooks you stick on the wall.
Yeah.
And I'd always end up leaving with a few of them. And inevitably, I would try to use them. So, you clean the wall, you stick the thing on there, you let it set, and then you hang a picture or something on it. And like, it could be an hour later, or it could be like 3 weeks later, you just hear a crash and you think somebody's breaking into my house, and you go in and the hook has just collapsed off the wall. And it happened so many times because I just kept trying. I kept trying with the same stupid hooks, and it never worked. And so what I realized as I was writing the book is that's a fairly good analogy for how we try to find happiness. We keep hanging our expectations on a new job, our next dating relationship, whatever it is. There's, trying a different church. Like you bounce from thing to thing, and we keep hanging it up, and it keeps crashing, and we keep feeling disappointment. And the whole idea there being those hooks are not made to bear the weight of the happiness we're expecting. Just like those stinking command hooks aren't made to bear the weight of like an 11 by 17 picture frame. They're designed to carry like, I don't know, a feather duster or something.
Yeah.
So in our jobs, in our relationships, those things are designed to make us happy, but we hang too much weight on them. We put the wrong expectations on those things, and that's where it ends up collapsing and kind of leaving our happiness in pieces. And our mistake is to continue to try. Like we just keep going back to the same hooks over and over and over again.
Yeah. And, somebody actually submitted a question related to those hooks, somebody that read your book. What do you do? What do you do after that? What do you try differently? And what has worked for you personally when those hooks do collapse?
Yeah. I think the natural thing is to think, well, I just need a different, stronger hook. So that job didn't work out. I just need a better job. That relationship didn't work out. I just need a better relationship. And I think we just kind of need to remove ourselves from that for a second. And when that has happened, the questions we need to ask ourselves are, what was I expecting and why was I expecting it? What was I asking of those things, that church, that job, that relationship? And is any church, job, or relationship designed to deliver those things? Mm-hmm. And generally the answer is no. Usually we're asking something of those that they're not designed to deliver. Right. We're holding them in too high of esteem, which is actually, what that ends up doing is feeding our cynicism, because then we become skeptical of work, we become skeptical of relationships, we become skeptical of church. That's one, boy, do people get skeptical about church.
Yeah.
And so, all of that, we just need to reframe and say, what those things are supposed to deliver happiness, but not this sort of ultimate redefining, self-fulfilling kind of thing. We should find happiness through our relationships, through church, through work, through whatever, but only in a certain extent, not maximum, not eternal, always with the understanding that it can only do so much for us. And that's not disappointing. That's just the nature of living in a world that was created good, but then fell. They're just, they can't deliver what we're hoping for.
And, the thing that I think why this example, hit me so hard was because, we have work and we have, relationships. Every time there's something new that comes at us, it's not always the same things that we can expect. I think we get blindsided by all these, shiny new hooks that we can try to use, and we jump around. And you said in your book, they're all broken. They're all broken, and none of them will satisfy us. And I think that's why it hit me so hard, because I can see myself jumping around. It was really easy for me to picture myself doing that,
Yeah, and I think if we honestly kind of review our own actions, take your last 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, you look at it and you go, yeah, I've absolutely tried that. Different people in different areas to different extents. But that's because we are hardwired to pursue happiness. And I think that's because I think God really intends us to find pleasure and enjoyment. And God created work. God created church. God created relationships. Those are things that are of God.
Yeah.
But when we expect them to kind of take the place of God in terms of how they fulfill us, that's where we're doomed to sort of have the crashing experience.
And so good. And this kind of leads into this one. Did you coin this word, evangelical guilt? Is that
I think so. I hadn't read it anywhere before.
Why don't you explain that concept to our listeners? And I think it kind of ties in with that, where we feel a certain way about these things or enjoying these things.
Yeah. Well, to explain it, I'll give an example, and then I think people who understand it will just go, yes, I know what that is. So evangelical guilt is it's the thing where you get back from vacation and somebody's like, oh, I saw the pictures on Instagram. It looked like an amazing place. Were you at the beach? And you're like, yeah, we were at this beach house, but don't worry, my parents paid for it. Or you pull up in your new car and they're like, wow, nice wheels. And you go, yeah, I got a great deal on it, talk the salesman down, got to kill it. The idea that we feel guilty about just enjoying something, and we have to kind of suppress this impression that we're doing anything lavish, that we're over enjoying, we're over indulging, and we do this all the time especially in the conservative Christian world. You know, somebody's like, I enjoy a glass of wine with dinner. Well, what they really mean is that they're a wine connoisseur and have like a really impressive wine cellar, but they can't say that. You know, they say whatever that is. You know, they get a new shirt, but then they talk about the coupon that they spent on it. A lot of it has to do with money, I've noticed. And so there's this low grade guilt about just enjoying, about relishing, about just saying, you know, you go on vacation, and instead of talking about how much it didn't cost you, you just say, man, we had such a great time. I loved it. The beach was beautiful. Those are good things. So that's the evangelic guilt, that idea of like, we can't over enjoy, we can't over express, we definitely can't overspend. And you just kind of got to keep those things on the down low.
And I appreciate you kind of calling that out, you know, and I think it comes from your own personal, I guess, experience with it, and obviously observing it in other people. You know, when you wrote the book, what I found out was that, you did give a lot of personal examples too. And you said it earlier, you know, your loss of the job, you know, the divorce that you went through. And so, was that hard? Was it hard for you to write about those things? Because to me, you know, I'm an outsider, you know, it seems really personal to me. And even this, you know, it took me a while to finally get the courage to finally, you know, start doing like these Instagram lives and just kind of reaching out. Sharing personal things is hard. How did you find the courage to do that?
I think it's a couple different things. One is just in communication, there's something powerful about personal connection, personal revelation of, this is how I've struggled with this. This is how I discovered this, because it allows other people to go, oh, me too. Or to find their version of that. So if I write about having been divorced or having been fired from a job 10 years ago or whatever, you have your version of that. I don't know what it is. I don't need to know what it is. But if I just say, if you're going through hard things or something, it's easy to just skip past that because we don't like to think about the hard things. But if I can write something that makes you feel something, like you intersect with that. Yeah. But at a more just sort of intellectually and spiritually honest level, there's just something about being transparent, not oversharing. Because again, I don't want to share other people's story. I don't want to share any undue details. But how do you trust me if I'm not forthright and transparent? How do you know that what I'm saying checks out in real life? If I can't say, this is how God worked in my life to teach me this, to show me this, to walk me through this. And so there is an element of fear in it, but the rewards way outweigh the risks. And frankly, most people are really gracious. You know, people there are nasty people out there, but thankfully you can just mute them or block them or whatever most of the time. But the vast majority of people are grateful. They say, that helped me see. There's some level of human decency and kind of Christian generosity and care that comes out. So it doesn't feel nearly as risky as it did a few years ago, because it seems, it's just how genuine Christian communication should work.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you're saying there's a certain like element of disclosure, you know, like kind of knowing what is appropriate. But then also a certain element of vulnerability where you're able to do it in a way that shows that you're human and you're not a robot writing this book, you know, like, and it did hit me, it did resonate with me. And like you said, yeah, I have my own things too. But yeah, just, you didn't have to disclose those things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so as
Yeah.
the reader, I'm reading your book and I'm thinking, oh, he didn't have to say that. Like I got his point already. But the fact that you mentioned, everything and you made it a little bit more personal, it did hit home a little bit harder. And so I do want to say thanks. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah.
Just as a reader, I know you don't have to do that.
What I really appreciate that, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful that it did help. Also, there's a phrase that gets used regularly at our church. I think it's one that our founding pastor Ray Ortland coined, but I don't know because I've heard it so many times.
Yeah.
And it's just this idea that you can be impressive or you can be known, but you can't be both, because all of us we have stuff that when people truly know us, they go, it will lower their estimation of us in a worldly sense. We become less impressive in that sense. But being truly known is, earlier we were talking about those deep, meaningful relationships. That's a thing we all really want.
Yeah.
And so as a writer, there's an aspect of that. I don't want the reader to have the impression that I have all my stuff together. I would like to sound, intelligent and thoughtful and like I've done my work here, but I don't want to come off as the expert. I don't want people to be overly impressed with me. What I want is for the words to connect in a meaningful way. And that falls in the category of known, not impressive. None of us feel that close to impressive people. We just sort of look at them from a distance, and that doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah, and that's how, what you said, how you want to be perceived, that's totally how I got you, And I know, okay, you mentioned your church, right? You actually dedicated the book to your church, if I'm correct, right?
Yep.
Did you start writing this, or I guess having the whole idea of this book in your mind like recently? How did you come up with this idea for the book that, hey, I want to write this, like this is what I've been going through in my own life? Yeah, how did this come about?
Yeah. I wrote most of the book was written last year, so 2019. I turned in the manuscript right at the beginning of this year. So pre-COVID,
right.
pre-insanity of political. I mean, I guess it was an insane political time, but we weren't in like the throes of election season.
Right.
So it was when people still thought 2020 might be a good year, and in reality, it's been a real challenge for a lot of people. Right. No, so it was born though out of I got to Immanuel in 2017, and God has used my time at the church, the culture of the church, the culture of honesty and humility and care, to be a profound restorative thing for me in such a way that it's now moved me into vocational ministry. And so the reason I dedicated it to the church was because this book wouldn't exist if Immanuel Church had not played that role in my life, if God had not used it in that way.
Wow.
And I didn't write about the church, but my realizations of, this is what genuine biblical happiness looks like, there's a direct line of connection to how the church helped me spiritually, relationally get back on my feet, and not just back on my feet, but kind of a significant growth track. And so, the dedication was because it has been profoundly used by God, and is still, it's where I serve now, and it's a dear place to me. But yeah, I didn't write the book thinking, boy, 2020 needs this book.
Yeah.
I wrote it thinking I may have to try to convince people that they're not as happy as they think they are. Because when everything is good, people don't want to be told you might actually be disappointed. That's sort of under the surface. Well, 2020 wiped a lot of that away because people are just all disappointed now. We're all frustrated with something, or scared of something, or pained by something. I mean, there's a lot going on. So that was timing that I had nothing to do with.
No, well, it does work out well, and I don't want to read too much into the details, like he dedicated it to his church. But to me, it actually makes a lot of sense. Like your church is your community. They're supporting you through this. They've obviously helped you through all the, I guess, the disappointments and the losses in life. Yeah, I shouldn't be surprised, honestly, you know? Yeah, and I thought that was cool because I've never like really seen too many books dedicated to a whole church, or at least I haven't read too many that have done that.
Yeah, and I mean what you just said in terms of the community and the help. I mean I I think what I said in the dedication, I can't remember the exact phrasing, was I can't, if I was to try to list people or
Right,
to write about people that
right,
deserve this dedication to it, I would have had to add whole chapters, which is true because
right.
there's people from my small group, there's people on staff, there's elders, there's just people who in my first couple of weeks there just pulled me aside and said, you know, how can we pray for you? And just sort of folded me in this just really gentle, normal way. And then just the culture of the church in an ongoing way. And then the move into leadership and being on staff there and how that has played a role in it. So yeah, it's a it the message of the book ties in very closely with what God has used the church to do in my life, in my soul, in my relationship, in my, you know, just sort of restoring my perspective. I don't know that I would be a recovering cynic aside
Mm.
from the church, because that
Ah,
in terms of just learning the significance of grace and joy and happiness to kind
yeah.
of keep cynicism at bay.
Man, that's so good. And honestly, it's really encouraging because you know, here in LA, you know, we're still doing the social distance church.
Hmm.
You know, personally, my church, we have like a drive-in service where we're like in our cars or, you know, in our parking lot basically.
Yeah,
And it's honestly a hassle. Like
yeah,
I have two young kids, you know, and my wife does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of like getting them ready to go. But it's important. The church is
yeah,
important. And you know, I'm not just talking about like, oh, we have to like show up there, you know. I'm talking about the relationships that you're building there, and so
yeah,
your dedication to your book and everything, just kind of seeing how it all played out is really encouraging. Thank you so much for sharing that.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
this isn't your first book that you wrote. You wrote at least two others. You wrote
Hmm.
The Pastor's Kid, and you wrote what was it? Help My Unbelief. God Help My
Hmm.
Unbelief. I noticed I can't put my finger on it, but there's like some kind of theme, some sort of running thread going
Yeah,
through this. Can you maybe enlighten me or help me see your mind in terms of like how it all connects? If there is, I mean, to me, I'm
that might
sensing
be a scary
something.
place.
Yeah.
No, I think there is a thread, not on purpose. You know, I didn't, you know, kind of map out this story arc,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but each book in some way did feed into the next. There's actually there's one that released before Hoping for Happiness, a book on curiosity that fits in there.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So the first book I wrote was The Pastor's Kid, which was it was kind of me writing from a first person perspective, kind of on behalf of pastors' kids. What are the unique challenges? What do pastors need to know? How can the church help? And then kind of how is it a blessing to be a pastor's kid as well?
Right.
But in that was a fair amount of just there's you know pieces of my story of struggling to find a spiritual identity, struggling to find a church home, some of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
As I was writing that, I realized that my faith struggles were not, you know, unique to me. And that's where Help My Unbelief came out of, just this idea of what does it mean to struggle with doubt? And it's based out of Mark, why am I blanking? 9:24, where Jesus, you know, Jesus is offering to help a father with a demon-possessed son. And he says, if you believe, I can help. And the man says, I believe, help my unbelief. And that sentence, I believe, help my unbelief, became kind of a paradigm for me of this is what it means to be a believer and to struggle, you know, struggle with doubt, need help, etc. And so that was what Help My Unbelief was born out of. So intellectual questions, spiritual questions, but that's not aimed at pastors' kids. That just, but it followed in footsteps.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of that was about asking questions. What is the right way to ask questions of God? A lot of that came a book on curiosity, because you start pointing those questions elsewhere and you go, well, what did what is the place of curiosity in the life of a Christian to really understand, to really connect with people and cultures who are different, to expand our horizons, to really dig into the depths of God.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought that was the end of that arc,
Mm.
but um, those things lay, kind of, you lay them down for a little bit and they start to take root.
Yeah.
And out of that came this idea of what does it mean to really be happy? Because so much of those were about seeking and asking. Well, as a result of those things, there ought to be fruit. And I think genuine hope in the Lord and grounded happiness are the fruit that God bears. So I think it's not the capstone book. I wouldn't look at it and be like it's my magnum opus.
Yeah, sure,
But
sure.
but it is if you're tracing a thread, it's the book that's like it's the bearing fruit of these struggles as a pastor's kid, this processing of doubt in faith, this book about exploration and seeking the Lord. And then now we have a book about what does realistic grounded happiness look like. So
Yeah.
I think there is a thread there.
Yeah, and when you lay it out like that, it is clearer to see. And it's also kind of cool because it all comes from what seems to be really personal to you, and it resonates with so many people. You published this one with the Good Book Company. How was it working with them?
Oh, they were great. They treat authors really well, and I don't mean like they puff us up. They have a respect for the vision of the author. So if an author is passionate about, I want to communicate this message, this is a thing that I'm pouring myself into, they treat the author and the work with that level of dignity. They take the editorial side of things really seriously, but they don't mess with your work, which so they don't come in and say, we're going to rewrite this. They simply want to see your work turned into the best version possible. Yeah. And then they have a good sense of who the book is for. So they take their marketing efforts and aim them in the right directions. Publishers often have pretty limited marketing capacities just because, it's not like it used to be 20, 25 years ago where the publisher drove all the marketing. It's sort of a joint effort, author, publisher. But they understand who the audience is, and they say, all right, we're gonna put this in front of the right people. But they're humble, they're kind, they're responsive, and the thing that I appreciated most was that they very clearly believed in the book. They believed in the message of the book, and in talking to a couple other authors I know who published with them, it's a similar experience. There's not a lukewarmness, and that's really great.
That's awesome. You said that you started working on this book back in 2019, I think. And so
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's your writing process like? Like, are you like pen and paper? Are you like, computer? Are you outside, inside?
The writing process for let's skip the book proposal part of it and all of that mess because that feels like business. The writing for the book itself is, usually one of the things that goes into a proposal, and then that's a really useful piece, is this sort of detailed outline of the book. So kind of a chapter by chapter description. So this book's going to be 12 chapters long, and this chapter is going to cover this, and this chapter is going to cover this. And that sort of becomes the plumb line for everything you do thereafter. It keeps you from repeating yourself or like going off on a rabbit trail. You're like, oh, that doesn't fit, so we're going to stick to this. So then for me, each chapter I actually outline by hand.
Cool.
So just use it, kind of a standard notebook, something like this, and it kind of looks like the scribblings of a madman. It's not neat and orderly, but it's the way that I kind of sort out the ideas in my mind. Some of it I'm writing in such a way that it's almost verbatim what I want to write. Some of it's just keywords and getting things in order. Then the actual writing, I type out, and that's where that's where I'm putting together the paragraphs and the sentences. I'm not a rough drafter in the sense of I don't just sort of hammer everything out and then go back and revise. I'll chew through a single paragraph 3 or 4 or 12 times to get it to where I go, I think that's where it needs to be before I move on. And I know some people say that's not the right way to do it, but it works for me. Yeah. And so, and then with the Good Book Company, their process for me was actually to submit each chapter individually, and then they would edit it. Okay. Yeah. And which I didn't like at first, frankly. I was like, leave me alone. I want to keep writing. I'll do editing at the end. Yeah. But it was really, really helpful because what it did was it set each following chapter up for success. because you knew what the previous one was, you knew which parts had been cut out, you knew or revised, and then you move on to the next one, and so that each one could stay strong, and there's just more continuity. So that actually really helped me. And then,
Yeah.
turn it in and off we go.
Yeah, and honestly, your book felt really, really tight in the sense where it's like, yeah, I can see like the logical flow. Like every chapter seemed to fit perfectly going into the next one. And if you're bringing up like questions, and it's like, okay, yeah, I should be asking those questions right now, or I should be thinking about that right now, following your flow of thought. You have a couple books under your belt right now. Any tips for writers? I know that a lot of people, when I said you were going to come on, there's some writers there. But then also just any tips for readers, people that want to read, for their own spiritual
Yeah.
enrichment, sanctification.
For writers, I think, well, just a basic tip, and this is something that I try to do consistently. If you read books about writing, like Stephen King's On Writing, or like William Zinzer's On Writing Well, or whatever, you'll often get the advice, write every day. I don't think that's necessary unless you're a professional writer. If you're a professional writer, write every day. It's your job. For most of us, that might not even be realistic. But so what I would say is do something every day that benefits your writing.
Nice.
So that's be intentional about what you're reading. And when I say intentional, I mean read a variety of things. Like it really helps me as a nonfiction writer to read novels, to read poetry, to read kids' books, to read like young adult fiction, just whatever, along with really good nonfiction, because there's just so much to be absorbed and grasped from those. I think, that could be journaling, that could be just dabbling, sketching things out. It could be taking notes on ideas that come into your head. I think that's another thing. If you want to be a writer, jot down every idea you have. Like just keep notes on your phone or a little notebook in your pocket, whatever format works for you, because that will help you overcome the inevitable feeling of writer's block. I don't think writer's block is real. I think writer's block just means push harder.
Yeah, I see how you said the feeling of writer's block.
Right. It's a perception. And then once you write enough, you realize that writer's block is not really a thing. It's just a delay.
Nice.
It's just a bad day. It's just a bad day at work. So
that's good.
We all have those. You have to push through them. And once you get to the other side, you're fine. But if you have this list of 27 ideas, well, one of them, just start working on one of them, and you're not working on a blank. In terms of readership, like just to grow as a reader, there's kind of two opposite directions, both of which can be helpful.
Okay.
It really depends on personality, I think, but I like to be widely read. So I try to be reading 4 or 5 different books at a time from different genres. So this one's historical, this one's literary fiction, this one's theological, this one's poetic, this one's a commentary on something. Just to kind of perpetually be absorbing knowledge and creative style from all those different things.
Nice.
But the opposite direction is pick an author or a topic and read everything. And I've done some of that too. Like I've read the majority of C.S. Lewis's books, not all. For sure. His real technical literary criticisms, I'm like, I don't even know what he means. I'm not that smart. But that's a beneficial direction too, because a deep dive will be formative in your thinking. It'll be formative in your understanding. And if you love the way that person writes, you're going to absorb some of those. Just some of the inevitable outcomes are going to be, they're going to work in your benefit. So one last thing on reading. Yeah. A lot of people get stuck in a rut. I only read theological books. I only read novels. I only read whatever. Yeah. So the starting place is just pick something that's in a different genre and read it. So if you're a theological reader, pick a novel and go. And just, there are great novels out there. Start with Leif Anger's books. Peace Like a
Nice.
River.
Nice.
Start with Frederick Backman's book, like Beartown.
Yeah.
Just those kinds of things. If you're only a fiction reader, go pick up Orthodoxy by G.K. Chesterton or Mere Christianity or or maybe something a little closer. Maybe pick up memoir or biography because those are stories, but
Nice,
they're not
nice,
fiction.
nice.
So,
Yeah.
like A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Van Auken or something like that,
Wow.
where you can kind of you can expand your horizons and begin to see like, oh, there's just a breadth of beauty and wisdom in these books that are outside of my genre.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's clear to me that, yeah, you are very well read. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for contributing your work out there so people like me can read it and benefit from it. Barnabas, I appreciate the time that you've given me to come on and to share your work. Somebody just said, I love the Minnesota State pick behind you. And
Yeah, that's actually somebody. That's Sarah, who we were in youth group together back in the day. She was in my brother's year in school,
that's awesome.
but we went to the same church growing up. So
Nice, nice. It just reminds me that you are in a different time zone, so I do want to
yeah,
respect your time. But thank you so much for doing this.
man, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much. Maybe, who knows, maybe we'll touch base again. But
Yeah,
for
I would
now,
love that.
thank you so much for your book, Hoping for Happiness. I'll see you around, Barnabas. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye.